When the world slows in upstate New York, it's always a kind of hush, quiet enough to hear the rhythm of sprinklers on brittle August lawns, the freight trains in the distance, the steady hum of bees by the chain-link fence. That morning, the sun pressed gently through gauzy curtains, tracing oblong shapes along the upstairs corridor of the Parker house on Magnolia Street. Someone had left a cereal bowl on the sideboard, Cheerios softening in milk, where tiny blue sandals rested beside it, the kind with scuffed rubber toes and constellation patterns printed over faded Velcro straps. Outside, Mrs. Delacroix cranked her garden hose across the street, the air sticky with cut grass and something else, something evaporating, just out of reach. The smell of impending rain hung low, clinging to the skin like memory itself. Neighbors still remember the smell of rain lifting off hot pavement, the way it signaled summer's slow departure in 1985. That Thursday morning, August 15th, it was 7:15 a.m. The town clock still half an hour from its bell. When Marie Parker smoothed her eldest daughter's hair and adjusted the strap of the younger's yellow windbreaker, their matching book bags already packed for the day. The kitchen clock ticked through eggshell silence as the girls zipped out, blue sandals slapping the slanted porch planks. There was crayon ink on the hallway wall from mischief the night before, and Marie paused, smiling softly as the girls darted toward the bus stop at Lakeview and Juniper, their voices carrying back in fragments. Something about trading stickers, something about recess. The screen door slammed behind them with its familiar metallic clang, a sound Marie would replay in her mind 10,000 times in the years to come. What does it mean when an ordinary morning folds into history? When the last memory is a half-tied shoe, a shared apple, a glance back over the shoulder? The Parker sisters, Lily, 9 years and 3 months, and Grace, 9 years exactly, born 11 months apart, moved through that morning like any children in any American town, unaware that the ordinary world was about to fracture. Their laughter still hung in the air as Marie wiped down the kitchen counter and poured herself a second cup of coffee, already planning dinner and wondering if she needed to pick up milk on the way home from work. If you value real human stories like this one, take a moment to subscribe and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Sometimes those small connections matter more than we know. By 7:55 a.m., the usual knot of elementary kids chattered near the battered stop sign at the corner, steam curling from Mrs. Delacroix's paper coffee cup as she supervised from her porch rocker. Her Labrador Boone padded by, nosing the gutter weeds and wagging lazily at familiar faces. The Parker sisters waited together under the faded bus shelter, swinging their bags, tracing letters on the fogged plexiglass with sticky fingers still smelling faintly of strawberry jam. The diesel rumble of engine 12 should have swung around the corner by 8 too sharp, its brakes hissing as it stopped to collect the neighborhood children. At 8:05, there was only the hush, the kind that feels too deliberate, an empty space where laughter should be. Mrs. Delacroix squinted down the street, checked her wristwatch, frowned. The bus was never this late. By 8:15, the children had drifted away. Some walked to school, others caught rides with parents running late to work. Mrs. Delacroix remembers standing, stretching her back, wondering aloud if the Parker girls had decided to walk the shortcut behind the old bowling alley. It was no more than a 15-minute trek to Riverside Elementary, a route she'd seen dozens of neighborhood kids take on warm mornings when the bus broke down or when impatience got the better of them. The path ran along cracked pavement, past cinder-block garages with peeling paint, a stand of scrubby poplar trees that whispered in the wind, and the back lot of Antonelli's Hardware, where spare lumber sat stacked under blue tarps that flapped and snapped in the breeze. 2 blocks later, near the vacant lot where dandelions pushed through gravel and broken glass glinted in the morning sun, someone would later find a scatter of colored pencils by the curb, waxy stubs of violet and burnt orange, the kind distributed in classrooms each September, the kind that rolled away easily when dropped. School started at 8:30. Roll call was taken in Mrs. Brennan's 3rd grade classroom, her voice steady and practiced as she moved down the roster alphabetically, waiting for the chorus of "here" and "present" that marked the beginning of another day. 2 seats, side by side, near the window overlooking the courtyard where pigeons pecked at scattered breadcrumbs, remained unfilled. At first, it seemed unremarkable. Children got sick, families overslept, cars broke down, dentist appointments ran long. But by mid-morning, when both girls remained absent and no phone call had come through to the main office explaining their absence, the school secretary, A woman named Iris with half-moon glasses and a penchant for crossword puzzles placed the first cautious call to the Parker residence. Marie answered on the second ring, her voice careful, heartbeat clattering like boots against the linoleum. "No, they're not here," she said slowly, as if testing the weight of each word. "Yes. Both girls. They left for the bus stop over an hour ago. They should be there." Time, that strange animal, began to drag and double back on itself. By 10:45 a.m., Marie stood at the bus stop, clutching her cardigan against the rising wind, asking Mrs. Delacroix the same questions over and over, her voice climbing higher with each repetition. "You saw them? You're sure? What were they wearing? Did they say anything? Did anyone else stop? Did you see a car?" The older woman nodded, patient and frightened in equal measure, her own hands beginning to tremble. Yellow windbreaker on the little one. Lily had her hair in braids with those plastic butterfly clips she loves. They were fine, honey. They were laughing. They were just fine. Officer Renaud responded first. An aging sedan with a dented fender, a badge number written in silver marker on his thermos, which he set carefully on the roof of his car as he took notes in a small spiral notebook. He was a man in his late 50s, soft around the middle, with gentle eyes that had seen too many small-town tragedies, and a voice that tried to stay calm even as his pulse quickened. He checked the route methodically, retraced the steps from Magnolia to Lakeview to Juniper, walked the shortcut himself, ducking under low-hanging branches and sidestepping puddles that never quite dried in the shade. He asked about family dynamics. Was there tension at home? A favorite relative who might have picked them up? A neighbor with a grudge? Any recent arguments or changes in routine? Marie answered each question with mounting panic, hands trembling as she held a framed school photo, both girls grinning gap-toothed into the camera, their eyes bright with innocence. The first hours were filled with nervous fidgeting and mounting dread that spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. A pink book bag was found near the corner mailbox, its zipper half open, a spelling workbook inside with Lily Parker, written in wobbly cursive on the cover page. The second bag turned up by the canal footbridge, waterlogged and tangled in cattails, its contents ruined but identifiable. Grace's name written on a library card tucked into the front pocket, but not the blue sandals, not the yellow windbreaker, not the butterfly clips. By 1 p.m., the search was formal and expanding, neighbors walking grid lines in the scrubby woods behind the bowling alley, sheriff's deputies knocking on doors up and down Magnolia Street and beyond, canine units brought in from Monroe County with German shepherds straining at their leashes, noses low to the ground, following scent trails that dissipated into nothing. The local grocer, Mr. Antonelli, posted a hand-drawn flyer in his window before dusk, two smiling faces beneath the word "missing" in blocky red letters, a phone number scrawled underneath. Someone called the radio station. The velvet curtain of routine parted, exposing something raw and unfamiliar beneath. A soft drizzle started that night, August 15th turning to the 16th in a blur of taillights and sheriff's cruisers idling at intersections, their radios crackling with updates that led nowhere. News traveled in whispers, growing heavier with each retelling, spreading from porch to porch, phone line to phone line. Someone claimed they saw the girls near the Tasty Freeze ice cream parlor at 8:10, ordering soft-serve cones from a man in a white apron who didn't remember them when questioned. Another said the younger one, Grace, dropped a jacket button on the bridge near the canal. A small yellow disc later collected and bagged as evidence, catalogued, stored. Cameras didn't watch every corner back then. 1985 was a world of film rolls and Polaroids, not surveillance grids. And so each claim, each detail, fragmented and scattered across a town stretching for answers it couldn't find. Small objects found or not found, an eraser here, a forgotten sweater there, turned ordinary life into a puzzle with too many missing edges and no picture on the box to guide the way. As dusk deepened into true night, Marie stood at the edge of the porch where her daughters had left just 12 hours earlier, blue sandals missing from their usual perch by the door, and wished for any noise but silence. The sound of cicadas rose and fell in rhythmic waves. Somewhere down the block, a screen door slammed. A dog barked. Life continued, indifferent and relentless, while two children simply vanished as if the earth had opened and swallowed them whole. Overnight, the Parkers' lives collapsed quietly. the way a house settles on its foundation. Slow, imperceptible at first, then all at once. Neighbors brought foil-covered casserole trays and whispered prayers Marie couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears that wouldn't stop no matter how many times she pressed her palms against her temples. Volunteers took shifts, each scouring ditches, parking lots, playgrounds, the dense thicket behind the old rail yard where rusted tracks disappeared into underbrush. The local florist, a woman named Greta who'd known Marie since high school and remembered her wedding day, donated white ribbons that fluttered from car antennas and mailbox posts throughout the town. The mayor, a balding man prone to long-winded speeches at town hall meetings, arranged for helicopters, a gesture no one expected for just kids gone missing, as some people whispered when they thought Marie couldn't hear. As if the tragedy somehow needed justification or didn't warrant the expense. The next morning, a news truck idled by the elementary school playground. Cables stretching like veins across the asphalt, a cameraman adjusting his lens while a producer barked directions. A reporter with feathered hair and a microphone asked Marie to describe her daughters, to say something for the camera, to give the public something to hold on to. Marie, voice breaking, hands twisting a tissue into shreds, said only, "They're good girls. They're so good. They listen. They do their homework. Please bring them home." The clip aired that evening on the 6 o'clock broadcast, sandwiched between a car accident on the interstate and a story about a county fair. People phoned in tips. One woman, breathless with certainty, said she'd seen 2 children in blue jackets boarding a Greyhound bus bound for Rochester at 9:30 a.m., that she was absolutely sure, that she'd stake her life on it. The tip seemed credible, specific, time-stamped, confident in a way that made investigators take it seriously. For 3 anxious hours, authorities scrambled to confirm passenger manifests, questioned drivers at the depot, examined grainy surveillance logs from the terminal's entrance camera. But the girls were not in Rochester. The woman had been mistaken, or lying, or simply desperate to help in a way that ended up wasting precious time and resources. Another door closed with a hollow thud. Weeks passed in a haze of desperation and diminishing returns. The local paper, the Sentinel, printed their faces between church schedules and high school homecoming announcements, the ink smudging slightly on cheap newsprint that left black residue on readers' fingers. Vigils were held, candles flickering in paper cups, hymns sung off-key in the parking lot of St. Jude's Catholic Church, strangers embracing and weeping for children they'd never met. Psychics called from as far away as California, offering visions of water, of woods, of basements with dirt floors and small windows. None led anywhere. Investigators followed each lead with dwindling hope, knowing that with each passing day, the statistical likelihood of finding the girls alive dropped precipitously. Holidays arrived, tight and awkward. An empty seat at Thanksgiving where Lily used to sit. Half-wrapped Christmas presents hidden away in the back of Marie's closet. Growing dusty as January turned to February, and the snow fell and melted and fell again. The fridge grew crowded with outdated calendars and flyers, faces fading under layers of magnets and grocery lists and appointment cards. Each year, the Parker sisters' birthdays came in spring. Lily's in March, Grace's in April. And Marie baked a cake, dark with chocolate frosting just the way they liked it. 1 slice for each girl, and a third left uncut, growing stale on the kitchen counter in the early morning light while Marie sat at the table and wept into her hands. The investigation shifted, sanded down by the passage of time and the weight of other cases demanding attention and resources. Out-of-town detectives arrived, rotating through every 6 months as funding allowed. One habitually overwatered the spider plant on his borrowed desk until the roots rotted. Another left shiny pennies as tiny tokens at each missing person site he worked. A private ritual no one understood but everyone noticed and found oddly comforting. Records piled high in cardboard bankers' boxes stacked in the evidence room. Witness statements typed on manual typewriters, hand-drawn maps with X marks and circles, transcripts from hypnosis sessions now considered dubious by modern standards, polygraph results that raised more questions than answers, and logs of license plates recorded near Lakeview and Juniper that August morning, each one painstakingly tracked down and cleared. Still, a few processes never changed, becoming ritualistic in their consistency. Every 5 years, the county cold case unit reactivated the file, dusting it off like an old photograph found in an attic trunk. Photos of Lily and Grace were age-progressed by forensic artists using pastel crayons and later digital overlays, each image a speculative bridge between then and now. What might a 9-year-old look like at 14, at 19, at 25, at 30? The portraits were eerie, hopeful, heartbreaking in their uncertainty, distributed to law enforcement agencies and posted online as technology advanced. Dental records, bundled in manila folders with metal clasps that left rust stains on the paper, were routinely submitted to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, a database established in 2007 that revolutionized how cases were tracked and cross-referenced with unidentified remains recovered across the Northeast and beyond. It was a meticulous but often dispiriting process that required exact documentation, chain of custody protocols, and patience measured in years rather than months. DNA collection advanced through the 90s and into the new millennium, allowing family members to supply cheek swabs for the newly formed Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, a federal database linking missing persons to unidentified remains and, occasionally, to living individuals whose identities had been lost or obscured through bureaucratic error or intentional concealment. Marie submitted her sample in 2003. Sitting in a folding chair at the county sheriff's office, a technician swabbing the inside of her cheek with a long cotton applicator, while she stared at a water-stained ceiling tile and wondered, as she had every day for 18 years, if her daughters were alive, dead, or something in between. Lost but breathing, forgotten but surviving somewhere under different names. Most searches strained under the weight of decades passing without resolution. Leads grew cold. Witnesses moved away or died, memories blurred and distorted with time's passage. The Parkers' kitchen grew quieter, routines calcified into soft repetitions that provided structure if not comfort. The sound of the radio at 8 a.m. became ritual, not hope. Marie still listened to the morning news, half expecting a bulletin, a miracle, a voice saying the girls had been found safe. Anniversaries came and went, marked by newspaper retrospectives that grew shorter each year until they disappeared entirely. The case relegated to footnotes and true crime forums, where amateur sleuths debated theories and pointed fingers. Investigators retired, taking institutional knowledge with them. The case file gathered dust in a basement archive. There were no breakthroughs, no sudden revelations, no dramatic rescues broadcast live on television, until the autumn of 2023. A new evidence review initiative, spearheaded by a state cold case consortium, funded through a federal grant designed to address the backlog of unsolved disappearances, triggered a wide-sweep clerical cross-check of unsolved cases against foster care, adoption, and social service records dating back to the early 80s. The goal was deceptively simple. Identify administrative gaps where children might have slipped through bureaucratic cracks, lost in a system designed more to process paperwork than to protect vulnerable lives. In the process, an intern named Kevin, a criminology student at SUNY Albany working part-time in the records division to offset his student loans, flagged a peculiar 1992 group home intake file from Yonkers in Westchester County. 2 girls, admitted separately within weeks of each other to different facilities, sharing birth dates that closely matched the Parker sisters, one born March 1976, the other April 1976, with place of birth listed vaguely as unknown or New York State, and scant identifying details beyond basic physical descriptions. The records, misfiled under a clerical alias due to inconsistent spelling and missing social security numbers, had never been tied to the Parker case, because the system simply didn't talk to itself across jurisdictional and departmental lines. Even when caseworkers had periodically reviewed missing persons databases as part of routine protocol, the girls' names had mutated beyond recognition through a combination of clerical error and possibly intentional obfuscation. One called herself Anna, wary of adults and their probing questions. The other, cycling through 3 foster placements in 2 years, went by Leah, losing any conscious trace of the Parker name or Magnolia Street or blue sandals by the front door as trauma and time eroded her earliest memories. This find wasn't a eureka moment. It was a nudge, a thread pulled from a tangled knot that might unravel something larger or might lead nowhere at all. Kevin brought it to his supervisor, a woman named Officer Callahan who'd worked missing persons for 15 years and had learned the hard way not to get her hopes up, to treat each potential lead with cautious skepticism tempered by thoroughness. But she ran the numbers anyway, pulling every available data point. Height, eye color, distinguishing marks documented in the original 1985 case file. A small scar on one girl's left knee from a bicycle accident, a faint birthmark on the other's right shoulder blade shaped vaguely like a comma, coupled with the age-progressed images from the forensic artist's files that sat in manila envelopes marked with dates and initials. Digital facial comparison technology, refined significantly in the last few years and used cautiously within strict privacy statutes and evidentiary standards, estimated a high probability match based on bone structure analysis, facial ratios, and surface markers painstakingly cross-referenced against old-school photos and family snapshots. Each data point raised more questions than it answered, opening doors to possibilities both hopeful and disturbing. Had these been administrative errors, random and tragic but ultimately accidental? Was there coercion, a deliberate act of erasure orchestrated by someone with motive and means? Or had the girls simply been lost in the system in a way no single person engineered? But bureaucracy, indifferent, overwhelmed, underfunded, stretched beyond capacity, simply allowed to happen through a cascade of small failures? Investigators, careful and skeptical by training and temperament, began the painstaking work of layering information, building a case that could withstand scrutiny. They pulled court records, cross-checked foster parent names against criminal databases, interviewed retired social workers who vaguely remembered the intake but not the faces or circumstances, tracked down addresses where the girls had lived during the late 80s and early 90s, apartment buildings now demolished, group homes converted to condos, trails gone cold through gentrification and time's passage. The investigation was fragmented, full of dead ends and redacted files protected by privacy laws. But one fact became increasingly clear through DNA analysis and documentary evidence. Two women, now in their late 40s, were living under new legal names in small towns upstate. One near Albany working as a library assistant, the other closer to the Vermont border managing a small bakery. And their DNA profiles, submitted years earlier during routine missing persons outreach efforts by local advocacy groups trying to identify Jane Does in close cold cases, sat waiting in the CODIS database like unopened letters, unmatched until Kevin's discovery created the bridge. Contact was a process, not an event, governed by strict protocols designed to protect vulnerable individuals from re-traumatization. Cross-jurisdictional law required notice and consent at every stage. New York state authorities coordinated with local family services agencies, mental health professionals specializing in trauma and identity reconstruction, and legal advocates who ensured the women's rights and privacy remained paramount throughout the process. Then, guided by trauma-informed protocols developed over decades of research into ambiguous loss and reunion trauma, phenomena studied extensively in cases of international adoption, wartime separation, and long-term disappearances, a slow, careful outreach began. Letters were sent, gentle, non-coercive, offering information rather than demanding participation or promising outcomes. Both women agreed, separately and without initial knowledge of each other's involvement, to meet with investigators and provide updated DNA swabs for definitive comparison. Neither had clear, linear memories of early childhood before age 10 or 11. Neither claimed the Parker name aloud or showed immediate recognition when presented with photos of Marie or the old house on Magnolia Street. Both described fragments when pressed gently, flashes of a yellow jacket hanging in a closet, the sound of a screen door slamming in summer heat, the smell of cut grass and someone singing off-key in a kitchen, that might have been genuine memory, or might have been imagination filling the void that trauma and dissociation had carved into their personal histories. The DNA results came back in late October 2023, processed by the State Forensic Laboratory, and reviewed by multiple independent experts to eliminate any possibility of error or contamination. Probability of maternity, 99, 97% for both samples. The numbers were clinical, absolute, incontrovertible, leaving no room for doubt or alternate interpretation. Marie Parker, now 71 years old and living in the same house on Magnolia Street where she'd raised her daughters and waited for their return through 38 winters, received the call on a Tuesday afternoon while folding laundry in the living room where afternoon sun slanted through Venetian blinds. She sat down slowly on the kitchen floor, phone still pressed to her ear, and wept with a sound that combined grief, relief, rage, and something beyond language. The meeting wasn't televised, nor was it immediate or rushed. Consent and privacy shaped each step, with mental health professionals providing multiple layers of support, therapists specializing in ambiguous loss and complicated grief, advocates trained in family reunification dynamics, mediators who understood from extensive clinical experience that reunion could be as traumatic and disorienting as the original separation, that happy endings were complex and often painful in ways fairy tales never acknowledge. In early November, nearly 3 weeks after the DNA confirmation, in a small, neutral room at a county office building, the kind with institutional gray carpets worn thin by decades of foot traffic, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, and a box of tissues on a particle board table that had seen countless difficult conversations, Marie waited. She clutched a paper bag in her lap, edges softened by years of handling. Inside were the blue sandals, carried for 38 years through moves that never happened, and fresh starts that never came. The constellation patterns faded, but still visible if you looked closely enough, if you remembered what they once meant. 2 women entered the room slowly, each accompanied by a therapist who stayed close but silent, allowing the moment to unfold at its own pace. They were strangers to Marie and to each other. Decades had rewritten their faces, their voices, their postures, the way they moved through space. They looked nothing like the age-progressed images and everything like ghosts made flesh. But Marie stood on trembling legs, and with hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the bag, she held out the sandals. One woman, Lily, though she hadn't used that name in living memory, though it felt foreign and sharp on her tongue, stared at the object as if seeing through time itself. Her breath caught audibly in the quiet room. She reached out slowly, fingertips brushing the rubber sole, tracing the faint outline of a nebula, a ringed planet circling the edge of a scuffed toe. Something shifted in her expression. Not recognition exactly, but a resonance. A vibration in a place she didn't know existed until that precise moment. She wept quietly, the sound strange but somehow familiar to her own ears, dredged from a place buried so deep she'd forgotten it was there. Years had built walls, brick by careful brick. Now, comfort needed to be relearned in the same painstaking way. The truth, as it emerged over weeks and months of careful, mediated conversations facilitated by professionals trained in trauma narrative reconstruction, was no fairy tale and offered no clean resolution. The girls, separated soon after their disappearance under circumstances still not entirely clear, had drifted through a labyrinth of temporary shelters, group homes, and foster placements scattered across New York State, lost to memory and to each other in a system that prioritized placement over permanence. No evidence pointed definitively to violent stranger abduction. No basement dungeons, no overt trafficking rings, no criminal mastermind with a clear motive. Instead, the fragmented record, pieced together from partial files and fading memories, suggested something more insidious and harder to prosecute. Systemic failure layered atop opportunistic neglect. A distant relative, later deceased under circumstances unrelated to the case, may have taken the girls under false pretenses in the chaotic first days, claiming familial authority that was never properly verified by overwhelmed authorities focused on the search rather than on who might have access. When that arrangement collapsed within months for reasons lost to time and incomplete documentation, the girls entered the foster system under fabricated or hopelessly incomplete documentation. Names misspelled, birth dates approximated, histories either deliberately erased or simply lost in translation between agencies that didn't communicate. The patchwork of 1985 social policy, underfunded agencies running on outdated record-keeping systems, overworked caseworkers managing caseloads that violated every best practice standard, paper files prone to loss, misfiling, water damage, and simple human error, enabled their disappearance to continue undetected long after the initial rupture, each administrative failure compounding the last until the trail went completely cold. Grace, or the woman who had been Grace Parker and was now someone else entirely, navigating an identity she'd built from scratch, remembered almost nothing concrete before age 12. Her earliest clear memory being a group home in Syracuse where she shared a room with 3 other girls and learned to sleep through crying. Lily retained more fragments but couldn't string them into coherent narrative. The smell of pancakes burning on a Saturday morning, a dog named Boone who licked her face, the sound of her mother's voice singing off-key in the shower to oldies on the radio, the feel of grass under bare feet in summer twilight. But neither could reconstruct a linear story of what happened between leaving for the bus stop and waking up in the foster system. Therapists explained carefully that this was common, even expected, in cases of severe childhood disruption and ambiguous loss. The brain protects itself by forgetting, by fragmenting, by building walls around memories too painful or confusing to integrate. Reunion doesn't magically restore what was lost. It creates something new from broken pieces. Gaps remained, vast and unbridgeable. The why, that painful, echoing question that haunted every conversation and every silence, lingered in the margins like a presence that couldn't be named or exorcised. Why hadn't someone noticed two girls matching an active Amber Alert description? Why hadn't the system connected two missing children from upstate New York to two unidentified intakes in Yonkers just months later? Why had it taken 38 years for databases to finally speak to each other? The answers, when they came at all, were bureaucratic, systemic, frustratingly banal in their ordinariness. Isolated databases that didn't communicate across county or agency lines. High caseworker turnover that meant institutional knowledge walked out the door every few months. Missing paperwork lost in floods or fires or simple neglect. And the grinding reality that vulnerable children fall through cracks every single day in a system designed more to process cases efficiently than to protect the humans at their center. Years lost could not be returned, rewound, or rewritten no matter how badly anyone wished otherwise. Childhoods, adolescences, young adulthoods, all gone, replaced by alternate histories in which Lily and Grace Parker did not exist, except as missing persons, posters yellowing in file cabinets. Instead, there were foster siblings whose names they still remembered, temporary guardians who ranged from kind to indifferent to worse, schools attended and left behind without ceremony, jobs worked for minimum wage, relationships formed and dissolved, all lived under names that were never truly theirs, identities borrowed and partially believed until they became the only truth available. Reunion marked not an ending, not a restoration of what was, but a fragile and uncertain beginning of something that had no template or roadmap. Therapy began in earnest, first as individuals working through complex trauma, then, gradually and with great caution, as a reconstituted family trying to build connection across a chasm of lost time. Specialists in ambiguous loss and attachment trauma worked step by careful step, session by session, managing expectations and holding space for grief that had no clear object. Birthdays were tentatively reintroduced as shared events, boundaries carefully negotiated around what could be asked and what needed to remain private. There were setbacks, misalignments of memory where one person's recollection contradicted another's understanding, the sharp edge of grief surfacing unexpectedly during mundane moments like grocery shopping or hearing a particular song. Habits formed in survival mode that resisted change even when change was desired. Marie, older now and moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had absorbed decades of stress, spoke less about forgiveness, a concept that felt both too large and too small to contain what she felt, and more about simply remaining present, showing up week after week for whatever this new relationship would become. She didn't demand explanations her daughters couldn't provide. She didn't insist on memories they didn't have. She learned their current names, their favorite foods, the small rituals that gave their lives structure, and she built from there. The sisters themselves, navigating their own impossibly complex terrain between who they'd been and who they'd become, chose carefully which pieces of their story to share publicly and which to keep private, protected. They decided, separately at first, and then together in halting conversations mediated by professionals, which names to reclaim and which to leave behind, what felt true and what felt like performance. Legal proceedings were initiated, petitions filed to reclaim original birth certificates, Social Security records painstakingly corrected through bureaucratic channels that moved with frustrating slowness. Inheritance rights clarified, though there was little to inherit beyond the house on Magnolia Street and its decades of ghosts. Lawyers worked pro bono, recognizing both the case's legal significance and its human weight. Neither woman returned to Magnolia Street to live. Home was a changing word for them. Not a location on a map, but a relationship still under construction. Something that had to be chosen daily rather than assumed. The younger sister, Grace, though she sometimes struggled to answer to it, though it still felt like someone else's name, visited the old house only once, in the spring of 2024, when crocuses pushed through the lawn and the air smelled of thaw. She stood on the porch where blue sandals had once rested beside the door, ran her hand slowly along the railing her father had built, before dying of a heart attack in 1998, without ever knowing what happened to his daughters, and wept for a life she couldn't remember but somehow mourned as if it had been stolen from her body. Discussions about the past were delicate, often painful, sometimes impossible. Marie wanted desperately to know everything. What had happened in those first hours, where they had been taken, who had cared for them or failed to, what their lives had looked like, whether they'd been happy or safe or loved. But the sisters had little to offer beyond fragments and approximations. Memory, fragmented and unreliable, couldn't fill the void no matter how many times the questions were asked. What they could offer instead was presence, the slow and awkward work of building something new from the ruins of what had been lost, of learning to sit in the same room without needing to fill every silence, of finding small points of connection, a shared laugh at a television show, a preference for tea over coffee, the way they both tilted their heads to the left when listening intently. Advocacy, not vengeance, became the family's shared purpose as months turned into a year. There was no single villain to prosecute, no clear perpetrator to hold accountable in a way that would satisfy the human need for justice. The distant relative was dead, the caseworkers long retired or untraceable, the system itself too diffuse and institutional to punish in any meaningful way. Instead, Marie and her daughters focused their energy on reform, on ensuring that other families might be spared the same decades of ambiguity, loss, and unanswered questions. In the years that followed the reunion, the Parker family became reluctant but powerful advocates for legislative and procedural reforms at the state level. They testified before legislative committees, their voices shaking but steady as they described what had been lost and what had been found too late. They shared their story carefully with policymakers and advocacy organizations, always protecting the sisters' privacy while illuminating systemic failures. They pushed successfully for streamlined interagency data sharing, ensuring that missing children's records were automatically cross-referenced with foster care, adoption, and social service databases in real time, rather than waiting for periodic manual reviews. They championed protocols requiring mandatory DNA collection and submission to CODIS for all unidentified or underdocumented minors entering state care, a measure that faced initial resistance over privacy concerns, but ultimately passed with bipartisan support. They advocated tirelessly for expanded training programs for social workers, emphasizing trauma-informed practices, cultural competency, and education about the devastating lifelong impact of ambiguous loss, a term many legislators and administrators had never heard before the Parkers made it impossible to ignore. A small local fund, initially seeded by neighbors who'd never stopped caring and matched dollar for dollar by the county in a rare show of institutional accountability, now supports families facing similar disappearances. The fund operates under a simple mandate: offer no questions, asked access to counseling services, provide legal guidance for families navigating the impossible bureaucracy of missing persons cases, and supply financial assistance for families who cannot afford private investigators, age progression services, or DNA testing. The fund is named simply and without fanfare, the Parker Sisters Foundation, and it operates quietly from a small office above the hardware store where Mr. Antonelli once posted that first hand-drawn flyer. It helps a handful of families each year navigate the impossible terrain between hope and grief, providing resources that didn't exist when the Parker sisters vanished into administrative silence. If closure can be defined at all, it exists only in the new doors opened for others, not in the old ones returning exactly as they were, or in the restoration of what was taken. The Parker sisters did not get their childhood back. Those years are gone, irretrievable, existing now only in imagination and in the alternate timeline of what might have been. They did not erase 38 years of absence or undo the fractures that loss carved into Marie's life and into their own. But they found, slowly and in fragments, something resembling family, imperfect, incomplete, sometimes uncomfortable, but undeniably real. They learned each other's faces and voices and habits with the deliberate attention of people building relationship from scratch, rather than resuming one that had been paused. They discovered unexpected shared traits that genetics and environment had both preserved. A particular laugh that bubbled up from the chest, a way of tilting the head slightly to the left when listening intently, a preference for strong coffee and old detective novels read late into the night. They built new traditions carefully, tentatively. Monthly dinners at a neutral restaurant where no one had history, Phone calls on birthdays that started awkward and gradually became easier. A shared trip to the coast one summer where they stood together in the surf and let the waves erase their footprints, understanding in that moment that some things don't get fixed but can still become bearable. Marie, in her mid-70s now and moving more slowly but with purpose, tends a small garden behind the house on Magnolia Street where her daughters once played. She grows tomatoes in wire cages, basil that she dries and gives away to neighbors, sunflowers tall enough to shade the back fence and attract goldfinches that sing in the early morning. On warm mornings when the air is still and clear, she sits on the porch with her coffee and watches the neighborhood wake. Children waiting for buses at the same corner where everything changed, dogs being walked by people she's known for decades, the ordinary rhythm of life continuing as it always has and always will. The blue sandals rest now on a small shelf just inside the front door, no longer hidden in a closet, but displayed in a shadow box frame where sunlight through the kitchen window catches the faded constellations and makes them briefly shine. They are no longer solely a symbol of loss, but also a quiet reminder of endurance, of the long and winding path that sometimes, just sometimes, against probability and reason, leads home in a form no one could have predicted. Even now, the story lingers like a footprint in wet grass, fading slowly but still visible if you know where to look and what you're looking for. Gaps remain. Questions persist without comfortable answers. But so does hope, fragile and stubborn and rooted in the knowledge that even after 38 years, even after bureaucracies fail spectacularly and memories fade into static and lives diverge beyond recognition, it is still possible to find what was lost, not perfectly, not completely, not in the way anyone wished or imagined during those long decades of waiting, but enough to build on, enough to matter, enough to justify the vigil. And in the telling, in the sharing of this story and others like it, the world edges back from silence toward meaning. One name reclaimed, one truth spoken, one family reassembled from broken pieces at a time.